My name is Jessamin Swearingen, and I'm a descendant of the Brock and the Swearingen family. I live in New York City, and my father was born in Lockhart, Texas.
Welcome to Clockmaster's Hour, a podcast connecting the past, present, and future of Caldwell County through oral history. I'm Brandon Gray, and I live in Lockhart, Texas. Today's guest is Jessamin Swearingen. Through her fourth great-grandfather, A.L. Brock, and the Swearingen family, her roots reach back to the foundational beginnings of Lockhart. Nearly 180 years after her ancestors first settled here, Jessamin became the first Swearingen in that direct line to be born outside of Texas. I was connected with Jessamin through her cousin, Philip Norman, who told me that she had been researching her family's history with the goal of turning it into a graphic novel. That research became the starting point for our conversation. As a quick note, you're going to hear us mention Jack Jackson several times throughout this episode. Jackson was a Texas-born illustrator, historian, and a pioneer of the underground comics movement. He created such books as Los Tejanos, Lost Cause, Commanche Moon, and the Alamo, an epic told from both sides. And you should check him out.
I still have plenty of relatives who live there, and as much as the Carter Flowers story, I think is really interesting and intriguing, and tons of things like from like my queerness to my lack of ever living in Texas. I have plenty of relatives who live there, and they're lifelong Texans, and they have a very different outlook, and um they've been Swearingens longer than I have. So I feel like I owe them a little bit of respect.
Yeah. That's a tricky part of this whole cemetery tour. It's, obviously we're drawn to the dark stories or whatever, but these are also people's lives, and I don't know, I'm learning as I go, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but and I haven't been to Lockhart probably in close to 10 years at this point. The last time I saw Lockhart, I was a little icked out with the highway overpass because that just seemed really offensive to my sense of what Lockhart was to me.
Yeah.
But I don't do well with change, and I live in New York City, and so I'll walk down a block and be like, ah, you know.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I noticed about the way Lockhart seems to be presented to me now, again, by my older relatives who live in Austin, is that it's gotten kind of hipster. Like they describe it in a way that it sounds like it could be vaguely Mission, like a bunch of kids in ZZ Top beards with one-speed bikes.
I shaved my beard, so I don't know.
And I would imagine, I mean, gosh, if I was in my 20s or 30s and still playing music or living a predominantly artistic lifestyle, I would love to have a house and live in a community like Lockhart more than say Austin, because Austin already has a skyline. I mean, it didn't when I was a kid. And so if you want that quintessential Texas flavor, you're not going to get it in Austin anymore.
Yeah, there's people that say that Lockhart is it's like the old Austin, or how Austin used to be, which I do feel that it means that we're also going to ruin it eventually, but no. But
Well,
not
yeah, but I
necessarily.
mean, to be fair, I think the last time I was in Austin, I was visiting my father in the hospital, and my brother, who's 12 years older than me, went to pick me up at, one of those new apartment buildings on 6th Street that had previously been, like a low riding block with a bunch of houses, right, with yards. And now it's, dramatically different. It's got literally, I think the same marketplace with like a blue market or whatever the place was called. I think the literal same imprint is in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I was doing an event like 5 years ago, and I was on the phone with my brother, and I was like, "Oh my god! Like this is literally where the hipsters live," and it could have been interchangeable.
Yeah.
Um,
You're,
and but the reason I bring that up is that being Gen X, I know that the boomers and the millennials and Gen Z, in terms of population, the size is so much larger. So, in order to provide housing for you, there needs to be, this change. And more to the point, my parents' generation isn't giving up shit. So, they're holding on to their houses. So, where are you guys going to go?
in the new shitty houses. No.
Yeah, no, for sure. And back to like visiting my father in Austin, I would freak out. I'd be like, "How are the kids cooking in these places, man? You couldn't open the windows. It was like staying in a hotel." So,
Yeah. You're
hey
talking
kids,
about.
get off my lawn.
I think you're talking about East 6th Street when you talk about the part
Yeah,
that's interchangeable with. I'm
yeah.
41. Can I ask how old you are?
I will be 55 the last day of July.
Okay,
So,
cool, cool.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, Gen X represent.
And so,
So, are you're a lifelong Texan?
yeah, I grew up in Corpus Christi. If you know,
Vaguely.
it's on the coast.
Okay.
It's gonna be the first city to run out of water in the United States. So we got.
Not Denver, really.
Oh, it's
Because
Denver.
the pooter is going dry. The pooter's how the rednecks say powder. La poudre. Yeah.
Oh well,
Um.
I think we're gonna beat them.
Really? Well, geez, and that's something to be proud of. American exceptionalism strikes again. There you go. There you go. I never lived in Texas. But my father was had a real, like, I think, love hate relationship with it, and by the time I was born, he was living in Colorado, which is very similar from a New Yorker's perspective. To me, it's like very Southwest, and wearing bolo ties and stuff. But I've lived in New York City since I was 11, so the Texas thing, particularly once George Bush got into office, was really like a kind of tricky thing. Like all my peers were like, "Jesus Christ, when you're on the phone with your dad, you sound terrifying," but I definitely think that there is something really fascinating, particularly about my father's family in Texas is a quintessential American story in terms of um, his ancestry. Swearingen used to be von Swearingen. It was a Dutch family, and they came over with the Dutch East India Trading Company. And the first Swearingen here was a cat named Gerrit von Swearingen. Came over in 1626 with Peter Stuyvesant. As a New Yorker, I'm like, well, that's kind of wild. And through land grants and war and white boy fuckery, they ended up in Texas by the first Swearingen that was in Texas in my bloodline was a guy named Jesse Swearingen.
Mhm.
And he was there with his older brother. I'd have to look at my notes, and I'm sorry I don't have that in
I
front
think
of
I'm
me,
gonna
but
bring up
he
my
had.
notes too, so you're good.
Y-
Um,
Yeah, and he had just gotten some land grant, or his brother had. His older brother was John, and they're both in that Lockhart cemetery. They're the first Swearingens represented. Jesse wasn't born there, but his son Samuel was born there. So that obituary I sent you, where they call him Lockhart's first native son, Samuel Blackstone Swearingen, was born and raised in Lockhart, and from what I understand, literally was a cowboy on the Chisholm Trail, because after the American Civil War, they come back to these ranches that had been burnt out, and the cattle's are starving, and all of this. So, uh, I believe. I mean, I know for a fact he spent most of his early life on the back of a horse, and so he probably recoup the family's finances. Samuel was the same generation, at least in terms of if you're lining up a family tree, he's the same generation as A.L. Brock.
Okay.
Yeah. So then Samuel has William Blackstone, and William's oldest son is my father's father. William's youngest son is Ed, the murderer.
Yeah.
So
Which we'll touch upon, but not dwell upon. We'll talk about the murder, but it's not like this is not a true crime podcast. And
yeah, and the other thing I always think of, I don't mean to interrupt, is that I'm sure that was one of many, right? I mean, the thing that I really thought about when I was looking into this in the court transcripts is that, these boys were just running around drunk and murdering Mexicans right and left because no one gave a shit and no one was really counting it. So I don't think that was really that exceptional or unique. It's just that they archived it and it happens to be someone that I am related to.
I mean, yeah, I'm watching Deadwood right now, and I assume it's kind of similar. I'm watching it for the first time, and the lead character is actually a Swearingen. I don't know.
Al is in my family tree, believe it or not. And I cannot. Okay, first off, that is literally the first time in my life that people could pronounce my name. And I was like, well, geez, isn't that convenient? Because I mean, most of the people I went to school with had like these like one syllable names, right? So they'd look at mine and kind of be like, what? I think Ian McShane is just dashing. He's just adorable. And it was funny because when that was at its prime on HBO, I was teaching at the girls' school that Ivanka Trump went to. Not at the same time, but to give you an idea of the sort of exclusivity and power, right? And all of the maintenance men just like fell over me because I was like this new computer teacher, and computers were kind of like new in education, and they could not believe my last name, and so I would always try to steer them away from the wrong pronunciation, that Woo switching, right?
I've probably said it wrong. I've
Yeah,
Swearingen.
you're
Swearingen.
soft gin. Yeah, my father had a sort of alcoholic way of looking at it. Like you get mad, you start swearing, and you drink gin. But at that point, I was already a junior high teacher, so I had to augment it and say, "You have a friend Jennifer who swears too much."
Well, I think it's a objectively cool name, honestly. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
And so your dad was Robert Lee?
Robert Lee. Yeah, he was born in Lockhart. And he had an older brother that we called Bubba, literally. So that's always fun. And my father was the son of what are considered the twins. His father was William Blackstone Swearingen, and then William's twin was James Samuel. I believe they were born in 1906, and they were identical. I remember being very small. I mean, I didn't grow up around my grandparents, but I still remember not being able to tell my grandfather and his brother apart, and being kind of creeped out by that. I mean, they were very identical. And one served in World War II and the other didn't, and would call the other brother up and be like, "Hey, I want to go Taiwan now, and you come over. I got my suit locked up." And they were able to do this throughout their whole life. Like, I heard a story about them when they were in high school or college and running, and some guy thought that he had been lapped, but it was literally just the other brother. I mean, they looked that similar. Yeah. And they were, from everything I have heard, from my father to my cousin Forrest, who had a different grandfather. His grandfather was Oscar. The twins got everything. They were the first grandsons and first grandchildren of the oldest boy. And from what I understand, William Blackstone, who was the first son of Emma Brock and Samuel Swearingen, um, William got it all. I mean, all the finances were consolidated for him, and he's the one who built that house, that portrait, that family Christmas picture I sent to you, and it's still standing. The one with the fans up on that second floor balcony and stuff.
Two-story house, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Um, he started a whole bunch of businesses, William Blackstone. Everything from like a hot dog stand to furniture to he started a Ford dealership and then gave it to his sons, who were the twins. And I have just all of these pictures of them on bicycles and at things that look like county fairs, and it's so evident, not only from the fact that this is a family that could afford to take their own photographs outside, right? Like my mother's side in northern Minnesota, every photograph's the same because they're bundling up to go, go to that place. And you could just sense the difference. Like, we either have our own camera or can hire someone to take pictures of these boys. They're that important to us. And by the time they were in college, their father was pressuring them to start this Ford dealership. And I sent you that picture of that Lockhart Ford dealership. And it might not be 100% factual, but the way it was always explained to me as a child was that they started the first or one of the first Ford dealerships in Texas. So that Lockhart Ford picture I sent you, it's from 1926. And back to how I always found it so fascinating, as if this was like a real Americana story. In front of that shop, you see all of these Model Ts, right? And there's some that look more like trucks. But you also see people still with their mules and horses, because I kind of feel like they're going, yeah, I see that you're going to do all this stuff, but like, we're really used to agriculture this way. I mean, this is cotton country, right? This is cattle country. And you see this whole generation of workers going, yeah, okay, oil hasn't come in yet. We're still agriculture. Like, we're going to stick with our animals. And that picture's so fascinating because then when cars took over, there's another level of industry that Texas can put a claim into because of oil.
Right, right. It's this like ongoing story of just like big change and resistance to change. But
Yeah.
AI actually is going to end the world. But
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
yes and no.
very quick.
I'm being a little
No,
silly.
no. I mean, very, very quickly. I think I taught computer science not computer science, but computer skills for a very long time. And I became very resistant to it when people started pressuring me into programming, because number one, even at the most elite schools, most American kids don't have the wherewithal to go through the trial and error to become a programmer. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
That takes a level of computational understanding that I taught for 25 years. I would say maybe met 5 kids who could hack it. I didn't hack it. I wasn't that sort of brain. And this mindset that America's going to be able to capitalize on that is frankly wrong, because we're too into patting ourselves on the back for our feelings getting hurt. And AI is and you know what? I don't need AI Beatles. I need, a band that actually learned to play their instruments and absorbed music organically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on for that forever.
I didn't mean to create like a. That's quite the digression, but it's.
I apologize.
Not, no. That I started, but like, yeah, it's just these big upheavals of change. There's the
Yeah,
the
and
trains or cars or
Or I'm so glad that you turned me on to that Jack Jackson book, that Los Tejanos book. I'm only a little bit into it. The one I texted you something about it. The one thing I found super alarming is the picture of him and his childhood friend is the same photography company that my Texas ancestors used. I have that same Foxco frame. I'm looking around because I'm wondering if I have one of them on my wall.
Yeah.
Anytime I would redo a photo, because I'm like, the family Photoshop person, anytime I would redo it, I would just use that Foxco border. And I went, oh, that's so familiar to me. Um, and the concept of people coming in, taking the land and saying, oh, no, we know what is good for this, versus the way something has been done for so long, right? That conflict is just constantly there. And now we might have it in technology or the drug wars. Who's the consumer? Who creates it? It's all the same shit.
Yeah. Do you happen to have that Jack Jackson book close by?
I have it on my Kindle, yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Never mind. I'm gonna look up that picture later. And yeah,
Yeah, and
that's one.
I'll send you something I have. I mean, I spent right during Katrina, right after that, I went to go visit my father in Texas. And he, at that point, was the oldest living member of his branch of the family. And he had a crate of family photographs, some going back so far that, like, we couldn't even piece together who they were. And I looked at him and I said, do you realize how lucky you were to have these? Like, growing up in New York City and with the World War II and all the levels of diaspora and stuff, like, very few of my peers can trace back as far as I can with that
Yeah.
level of, like, legitimate authenticity. And I said, look, buy me a scanner, and I'm just gonna sit here the next time I come down here. I'm going to scan all this shit. And then I put it up on Flickr, password protected. And when he still had his marbles, he was able to just sit down and annotate it. And I was so glad I did that. And then once he passed, I sent the same archive to my oldest brother, who could that, double dip. And I used to always tell my students, like, the best thing you can do for your family is go into that genealogy thing, because the older they get, the more they want to hold on to their past in a weird way. Um, I don't think that's something that we really understand until we're in our, like, 40s or something. I mean, I hate to sound like that older person, but
No, it's true.
I always I always tell my former students that, like, that's really the best gift that you can give your family. Um, and sometimes they come back and they're like, "Oh my God, that made Thanksgiving so much easier." And I'm like, "See, there you go,
It's
there you go."
also, yeah, it gives you something to do. Yeah, the job.
Yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. I think that the Swearingen thing in Lockhart was always fascinating to me too, because that cemetery, what is it called, like Lockhart Municipal or
Yep,
something,
that's the big one. Lockhart Municipal
is,
Cemetery.
I think the first time I went there, I think I was about 11, so that was sometime in the early 80s, and I believe I think my grandfather had just died, and I'd already been living in Manhattan, at least for like half a school year with my father. And I just remember that drive from Austin out to Lockhart. And I try to describe it to people who haven't seen it, like, you're coming up on Plum Creek and you literally have tumbleweed blowing across the road.
Yeah.
And it's just so wildly atmospheric. And I don't know if you got a chance to check out that sound file I sent to you from Ed Jr., who would have been William Blackstone's nephew, the son of murderous Ed Airplane Ed, the guy
Airplane
who,
Ed.
who basically invented the Learjet, but no one wanted to say Swearingen. When he was still alive, my father and I took him to Smitty's for barbecue, um, and I interviewed him, and I got the sound recording, and I was just so grateful that I did that, because I mean, I can hear myself slipping into some sort of Texan drawl, but any of the people I talk to, they'll like, they're convinced I sound like, like New York or Supreme. But it was just so interesting to hear that Texan accent from someone who had been alive in the 20s, the way he phrased things and the stuff that was important to him. And his descriptions of being a boy on Plum Creek and searching for Apache arrowheads and shit like that. And I was like, whoa, because again, living in New York City, it's really, really hard to, even if you like history and you're curious about stuff like that, like Manhattan was already being gridded, and buildings that would eventually need elevators were already being built when Texas was becoming Texas. And my ancestor had this meat market that the parking lot used to be a cow field, right? Like that's Smitty's. Like Jesse owned the meat market that became Smitty's. And I'm so blown away with America is way too big for its own good. And the cultural erasure and amnesia that we can so conveniently have, I think, is manifested in the vastness of the geography, right? One of the things that I always like to tell people is during the time of the American Civil War, there's something that was happening in Colorado called the Sand Creek Massacre, where, to my knowledge, as many Native Americans were slaughtered as American soldiers, both in the Confederate and in the Union. And it was barely paid attention to because the land that would become Colorado was really still Mexico, and no one gave a shit about it, right? It wasn't part of the Union. So why are you paying attention to these, land removal and all of that? And I always think about that because New York City is already getting gridded and plotted out, and like a cemetery that I love to wander around was already built when Texas wasn't even Texas yet, right?
Yeah.
Or it was, excuse me, Texas was Texas by 1840, but the state I was born in, Colorado, wasn't a state until 1876. So this conception of ownership, like, I don't know, white people are weird, man.
Yeah, that juxtaposition is like, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So you do not have that many like memories. I don't know. I can see you like in New York and just kind of, I mean, I live in Lockhart and Lockhart feels larger than life to me in a way. It feels like so connected to that older world. But I can only imagine for you just like, childhood memories at 11 years old and then just having access to all these old photographs, how it could just like really be like in your imagination just grow. I don't know. I can see how it's so strong, how, with that
Yeah,
fascination.
it's like this strong sepia tone sense of Americana. The other thing that is a little difficult, at least for me, is just the machismo of it. Like none of the women are represented, very very like minimally. So and this happens a lot with genealogy. It's like you're going through these like male names, right? But I definitely noticed it when my father was alive and I'd visit, and just the sort of like, well, hey, little lady, and I'd be like, well, I would love to see how you react on a subway in rush hour, sir. Come on up, just. But I mean, that's cool. I mean, I it takes all kinds, right? Everyone should just try to be tolerant, try to like, let each other live. And I'm very aware of the fact that me coming down to Lockhart and introducing myself as Jessamin Swearingen has kind of ruffled some people's feathers because they'll point to my great aunt's gravestone and be like, "No, I knew her, and she did not behave like you." And I'm like, "That's cool. That's cool."
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, and again, I'm talking about people who probably haven't been around for about 20 years, right? Who were probably born in the 20s or the teens, right? I mean, you'll find that in New York. America is a very interesting place, and through, I think, culture and media, we're able to sort of evolve. Maybe even sports too, right?
Yeah. When you came, how many memories do you have in Lockhart? Kind of just like total. There's at 11, you drove.
Well, that was my grandfather's funeral, but I never lived in Texas, and my father. Okay, so let me back up for a second. My father was back in Texas, and he had retired before 9/11.
Okay.
So that was what, 2001 was
Yeah.
9/11?
Yeah.
Okay. And so he was back in Texas, and I was kind of having to brace myself for, oh shit, like this is a reality. I'm gonna have to start spending some time there. My father was my only parent. My mother was in my life, but she didn't raise me, and my dad was definitely like the sole caregiver. So um, a lot of my sense of not all of it, but the dominant sense of history probably came from his family, which is not fair because obviously I have a mother, but that's just how it goes. So when he retired, it was a little unsettling because all of a sudden there's something about when people age, all of a sudden they become young again. And he was back in his home turf and connecting with people that he had grown up with in Austin and hanging out with people he went to elementary school with, and I was just like, who is this person? Like, wow. And it was really darling because he had moved around a lot from with the military and multiple marriages and stuff, so it was nice for me to see him have this sense of home, and it made me very curious, like, what is this, right? So then fast forward a bit, and I I had to put up a website. And this is like way back when like no one had websites, right? So I'm like one of the few people who has a website up, and I had done my undergrad thesis on the emergence of punk in America. So that's kind of what the website was about. And I was working with a woman who, I'm sorry, this is very convoluted. There used to be a company.
Because part of me
There's
wants
a
to
company.
digress into like you opened for Nirvana also.
Yeah, don't even go there.
Yeah.
There was a company called Tower Records, and they had these data kiosks that fed the data to a company called Muse, and I worked there, and I was such a stoner idiot. My data entry sucked, so they had me like writing little annotations, which is great. Going to work and like put on my headset and write them. Anyway, one of the women who would love to inform me how bad my data was a woman named Edith Frost, who, if you actually Google her now, she's on a record label called Drag City, and I would say is my generation's Joni Mitchell. That woman is one fuck of a songwriter. Good God. Anyway, she had a website up, and she was about to quit the company that we were at, and she puts out a record, and everyone's like, oh my God, Edith Frost is God. So she's like, yeah, I am. Puts up her website, links to mine. Edith Frost is, of course, heir to the Frost Bank, as most rock stars are, of course. And I get this email. I'm like, I don't know, I'm at home. This is like 30 something years ago. I'm at home, and I get this email from this cat named Forrest Priest, and he goes, I think I'm your cousin. I'm like, what the you know? So I open it up, and it's basically like, I'm looking at this woman, Edith Frost website, and she linked to your website, and I knew Jessamin Swearingen. You must be related. I mean, because no one has my name. No one has my name, which is kind of difficult in some ways. I mean, I've taken down social media, and like at least once a week, I can see people are trying to, robot hack my old accounts. Anyway, I get on the phone with my dad, and I'm like, Dad, this dude says he knows you and he's your cousin. My dad's like, what's his name? I tell him, and he's like, holy shit. So that's kind of what really prompted me getting more curious about this, because my father had retired and moved back to Texas, and this forest guy gets in touch with me, and he's like, "Holy shit, you're named after one of my aunts." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And he starts trying to make social overtures with my father. My dad was a total snob, so that didn't go over so well. But in that whole process, um, I became the family historian, because my brothers were like, whatever, like, we don't care. We've lived here our whole lives. None of this is interesting. And I was just like, okay, fine. So I ended up being the person that they'd like mail all this shit to. So I guarantee you, everything that guy Norman sent you came from me, but came from Forrest or Ed, because there would be like old scans of family obituaries, old scans of pictures, like tons of weird shit. And so over the years, I just sort of compiled it and tried to figure out like who is who. Da, 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 da. And then my father, who died of Alzheimer's, started, really just not. He really wasn't there as much, but before he really succumbed to that, a lot of people, when they get Alzheimer's, like the paranoia really ramps up. And I was I was so intrigued with all the stories I was hearing, and particularly with the story of Ed the murderer, that I was like, I want to see if I can draw like a little comic novella about this, because I just found the story so compelling in a disturbing way. Like, it was so evident to me. In a nutshell, this guy murders someone, and his older brother makes it so he doesn't have to serve a day, and gets him out of three different counties. Ed Swearingen. Yeah. Ed was the youngest brother of William Blackstone.
Gotcha.
Um,
He went off to World War I.
World War I. Ed and Ed's name was Ed James Swearingen, and his older brother was Joe Brock Swearingen. And I believe there were 5 brothers. One didn't make it past infancy, and in typical Swearingen fashion, there was one female probably going, "What the fuck? Get me out of here!" She married Norman Ross. That was Sadie. But Joe and Ed both went off to serve in World War I. And in that Christmas portrait from 1914 that I sent you in front of the house, Joe's in his army uniform, and it kind of looks like, like John and Sergeant Pepper's, like they're kind of holding him up because he's already lost his shit. And they just sent him away almost immediately after that. Like, there's just no talk of him. Like, he just was nuts, and they just sent him away. And Ed, I think, had equal amounts of PTSD. It just manifested differently. And he's the one who ended up murdering his friend Carter, who is also buried in that Lockhart cemetery. Ed isn't buried there. I forget exact. He might be buried in Laredo or something. It's on that Find a Grave thing. But Carter was from, my understanding, Carter was from a much more lower class, working the land family. And Carter and Ed both served in World War I and then came back. And
I heard that war was pretty horrific, as far as my understanding is. Yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, I would assume most wars are. I mean, I think the thing is, it's like, you see this in all the films, right? It's like, young man wants to go do something and be brave and be heroic, and then they get there and they literally get the shit scared out of them, right? And like, nothing is ever the same, and the level of PTSD and destruction and like craziness. And then you go home And either you got family members who are like, pull yourself up by your boots, boy, like get your shit together, or I told you not to go. Like, I mean, who knows? It's like I've heard the narrative for Vietnam. I've seen it acted out with, like, I mean, I have former students who went into the service, and it was like, good God, what are you doing? So I think it's a story as old as time, but with what I know about how this is going to sound really horrible, but like, at least from my experience with how my branch of Swearingen's deals with either depression, addiction, fear, or feelings of inadequacy, well, that doesn't exist. Put that away. Do not embarrass us and shut the fuck up. So I can't imagine Ed coming home and being 10 years younger than those twins, looking at them, and they're getting bicycles and ice creams and sailor suits, and he's like, what the fuck, and Will set up, William Blackstone, Ed's oldest brother, set up the other brothers, the oldest brothers, the ones who didn't go to World War I, all were set up with their own little businesses, from furniture stores to hardware stores to whatever. So Oscar and Henry both had their own businesses that were really set up with either their brother or their father's money. Ed comes back, and he's probably a little anxious and depressed. I mean, I can understand. And he, from what I understand, and you're going to get a better sense of this listening to that sound clip I sent you, that interview with Ed Jr.
Oh, do y'all touch upon this story also? Or
For sure.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. And you can tell how much it still upsets him. I mean, the poor guy was in his late 80s, and he was still like, eh. And I felt really awful about bringing it up, but like, I couldn't help myself. And also my dad was, literally in the back seat being like, come on, the sense I get is that Ed Sr. was like a land surveyor, or got land deeds. So the way it was explained, and I could be wrong, but in these areas where, and I saw this in my mother's Minnesota, all of a sudden you get these white people moving into the land, and they're like, well, I'll take that. And so they have this piece of paper that says, oh, this is mine now. Right. And that's what Ed did. And I think that plays right into that Jack Jackson stuff, right? It's like, well, what is ownership? And like, we've had this for a millennial. You're going to come in and what? So Ed's job after World War I was to go all around that area of Texas. He wasn't in Lockhart. I think he was in Laredo. I'd have to check my notes. I apologize. But to go around and see if the people on their spots of land had it legitimately or had the paper to prove it.
Oh. Okay.
Boy, doesn't that sound fun and intellectually stimulating?
Yeah.
So, and he liked to drink. So that's how he blew off his steam. So what I understand is he had to come back to Lockhart for Christmas, as you do. And he brings his wife, Ruby, and he brings his son, Ed, and I think they had a daughter who was either Ruby Jr. or Ida. I'm not 100% sure, but he brought his kids and his wife back to Lockhart in 1929. It was right around Christmas, and then proceeded to drink for about 3 or 4 days straight. And because his oldest brother runs this Ford dealership, he liked to play with cars. And from what I understand, Carter got his hands on one of those cars, and Ed wanted it back. And that's where the whole hassle starts.
Oh, we actually know where the hassle, or we have a good idea of where the hassle started. Oh,
I think it has to.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with those cars. And again, all those articles I dug up and stuff, they interview Carter's mom. And I get the impression that Ed was just drunk dialing and being like, "Where's Ed? Where's my car? What's going on?" And even his wife was like, "Wow, you got to calm down, man. Like, what's going on? It's Christmas. We're here for the fam." The other thing that really struck me when I was reading that is that Carter Flower's mom is telling the court this isn't the first time that Ed and Carter had been involved with someone getting murdered. It sounds like they had killed a Mexican, either drove over him or killed him or something, but just left him on the side of the road. And it was, it's no big deal, man.
Right.
I'm a white man in Texas. You know who my daddy is? Like that sort of shit, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening, and then Ed's really drunk, and he's in that town square, which you know much more than I do. I mean, I can barely visualize it. But he's sitting in there, and at that point, and this is the sort of thing that I would love to be able to get town records to be able to have proof of where the restaurant was, because he sees, and it's in those court things. He sees some black kitchen cooks or help. I'm not 100% sure, or cleaners or something. And it's like outside the back of a restaurant or like a country market or something, but it's right on that square. And he takes a knife from one of them, like out in their hands, stabs Carter in the liver, all the while drunkenly howling, "I'm going to wreck your brain." I mean, wow. Stabs him in the liver, turns to the two black guys and is basically like, "Didn't see that, right, boys?" And they're like, "No, sir."
Wow.
It's and I think, again, like, I could see why, my father and brothers would be like, "Wow, why on earth would you want to tell this story?" But on another level, I think it's so important to tell this story because, to me, as a woman, I'm looking at this and going, "My Lord, what these boys thought they could just get away with." But again, they wouldn't have gotten away with it if they were Mexican or black. And would he have gotten away with this if he was not the son of Samuel Swearingen or the brother of William? Because the thing about the court stuff that really like got me going, like, wow, shit, this could be a really interesting little novella or short film or something, was the description of William and the oldest brothers all sitting in the court and just, arms folded across their chests, just looking. It's like that opening scene in The Wire when he's like, "You're not saying shit," and that struck me so intensely. And then when I looked at it deeper, well, God, he took it to 3 different counties. He basically made it so 3 different counties and 3 different juries were like, I'm not gonna put my name on the line to get that guy in trouble, because most likely either they worked for the Swearingen family or they knew someone who did.
Yeah. So
Because Caldwell County at that time, I mean, I'm sure that of course there has to be other places than Lockhart, but Caldwell County, that's Lockhart.
Yeah.
And I know the other county was Travis, so that's Austin, but I'm not sure what the other one, but still 3 different counties.
Yeah. And so he
3
eventually
different
got off.
juries.
And I saw somewhere, or maybe you told me this, but they had trouble getting a jury because everyone's related to each other.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But having taught at some pretty gnarly private schools in New York City, where like the first thing out of the principal's mouth the first day is, "Don't talk to the press." Like you know where your bread is buttered, man. You're not going to take a chance, right?
Also, I'll say this. Also, I was trying to find this story because obviously it's in the Austin Statesman, like you
And
found.
the
Like,
Lockhart Register. Yep.
well, I couldn't. Did you find it in the register? Because I couldn't find it in there. but there was like 10 Austin Statesman articles that you found, but I couldn't find it in the Lockhart Register. Maybe you did find an article,
Mm.
but I found it kind of weirdly absent from for such a big story. So from what I can tell, it
Yeah,
wasn't.
well, I compare William Blackstone to Joe P. Kennedy. It's like when everyone's like, "Well, would have Teddy gone down for Chappaquiddick if Joe was still alive?" No, no, because he would have gone in and been like, "You're erasing that shit right now." Like that didn't happen, right? And I have the same exact feeling. And look, I am so proud of being a Swearingen, man. It's like I'm sure you get the impression I'm a pretty ballsy chick, right? And a lot of that comes from being raised by like some pretty intense Texans, and then growing up in New York. But I am completely enamored with my family and my family history. It just so happens that they abused some of their privileges, like so many Americans did. It's just easier to illustrate in this finite way. And because of that,
Absolutely.
I feel obligated to do so because you know the first time Trump got elected, uh my father's Alzheimer's had just been diagnosed, and he was really battling the anxiety that it was giving him, and he was so angry with me that I was trying to approach this, and he was like, "Why do you find this so compelling?" And I didn't I don't think I understood at that time that to me it was just another American story. I'm so sorry it's attached to my family, but wow, in a fishbowl microcosm, this is such a efficient way of explaining economic racism and the long lasting power it can have to silencing people, even generations later who'd never even met these people. The immediate anger it gave my father of like, why on earth would you want to tell anyone that? Like,
Right.
well, they're all dead, why do you care? And also, like, I'm really sorry if it makes anyone uncomfortable to acknowledge that white privilege is, in my opinion, one of the lasting stains on our culture. It's like the greed, the patriarchy, this consistency of, why can't you be satisfied with what you have and helping someone else, man? Can't that be your own level of wealth? And it's like I look at my family in particular, and man,
Yeah.
some of the people I work for and I've taught, and it's like, no, it's never enough. It's never enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, it's not even that personal about the Swearingens. It's more about like the atmosphere and the systems of that day and time. And that just happens to be, a story that shows
Absolutely.
these things.
Absolutely. And that's why, when you turned me on to that Jack Jackson book, I was like, whoa, because I'm not going to say all of Don Winslow's books are great. In fact, I think the most recent ones have been rather subpar. But his Mexican border focused drug cartel ones, the border and the cartel, and there's something about the dog. I forget exactly what it was called, but they're quite exceptional in terms of giving you a sense of the futility and the vastness of it all. And there was something that really struck me with that Jack Jackson stuff in the same way of being like, I cannot imagine that lovely description of Juan's son and how this sense of obligation you have, where you have all this fantastic land, but all these people you also want to protect, but then you also have your own family that you need to get them to survive. It's like
Mhm.
this constant, um I don't know, it's interesting. Did you ever see that show The Sun? It was on
Sounds FX maybe?
the yeah, the book was great, and
I
then the
didn't know.
TV, I actually I was in, the casting was kind of weird because they had some British guy play the Texas patriarch, and I was like, huh? Really? But he managed the accent and stuff. But the character that I found so compelling was the daughter, who ends up being the lone person surviving. And there's a couple fascinating clips in it that They show the land 100 years ago before all the city and the skylines there, and then they show it once everything's been built. And I feel like in my 55 years on this planet, I've seen that in Austin, and maybe you will see it in Lockhart, when like the land gets eclipsed by the buildings, right? And the people are forgotten. But Texas is still Texas, man. I mean, I'm a New Yorker through and through, and I definitely, like, last time I visited Colorado, I was like, oh wow, right, like this is why, like, I still, do a lot of denim and this and that. But predominantly it's the Texas. It's the my ancestors had to wear this shit so they didn't get bit or burnt. It's not fashion, okay?
Yeah.
And there's something that's very strong in me in that. And I'm very grateful that I have that, because it's given me an ability. I mean, some of the places I've taught, man, teaching in the South Bronx as a white girl was an interesting experience. But at the same time, you got to get off that train and walk like a cowgirl, man. You got to be like, I own this shit. Don't
Yeah.
mess with me. You know, and that really helped, because there's something about that, cowgirl swagger, where you're like, okay, this is it. I got to do it. Definitely helped playing and being a musician too. Just this sense of like, all right, gotta own this shit. And I think Texas more than Minnesota, in terms of my DNA and ancestry, probably gave me that obnoxiousness.
I wanna I wanna jump back into I wanna keep going on like when did you get into like illustration and Jack Jackson and stuff? But
Mm.
first, can we tie like a little bow on Ed eventually got off on bond, correct? Like he
Something like that. I mean, it's like, it's kind of like what you were alluding to. It just starts petering out. So I think if the murder happens around 1929, by around 31 or 32, you just stop seeing any evidence in it. I had a former student who had moved down to Austin. She was between gigs, so I basically paid her to scour every library resource she had in Austin. I said, put Swearingen, Flowers, and Lockhart in, see what comes up, right? And so that's how I got all that stuff.
yeah.
And we were both very frustrated. We were like, because then I wanted to like document it, right? Like have an outline. Okay, so what happened then? And it was like like there's no finality, and it just really bummed me out, because I was like, well, what can I say actually happened? And to me, that's kind of part of the. It's like an inverse of the story, It's like,
Yeah.
well, the silence is deafening, isn't it?
Yeah. I did see
Yeah.
one where he maybe pleaded insanity or like
Well,
temporary insanity.
okay, and that's where the cannabis comes into it,
Yeah.
because they were trying. There's a guy, I think his name is Dr. Smith, and he's a medical doctor. And they kind of, and again, you're gonna have to look at the articles, but to my knowledge, they spin a tale that Ed had been suffering from depression. So they were kind of like, what the hell's wrong with you? And even before he stabbed Carter, they had him talking to this doctor, which might be another reason that he comes into Lockhart, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
Christmas, but it could be another thing. I'm not 100% sure.
Sure.
But the doctor's name was Smith, and I really get the impression that and to my knowledge, they even say something along the lines that either his oldest brother William or his father Samuel were like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, we're going to send you to the doctor. What's going on? And I just think he was just really depressed and freaked out,
Yeah.
and just probably couldn't get it together. And look, alcohol is legal. I think alcohol is a lot more likely to make someone go blind, insane, and violent than cannabis any day of the week. But because cannabis was illegal and associated with the Mexicans, it was a lot. more convenient to wrap that bow on it and be like, well, my boy smoked some reefer and lost his ever loving mind,
Lost his
and
mind.
that's the
Yeah.
picture that, yeah, that's a lot more convenient, to be like, well, he lost Christ and became a Mexican. Oh my God.
Cool. Yeah, that feels like a pretty good bow on that story. What else do I want to talk about before?
You wanted to ask me about the illustration stuff?
Yeah, how long have you been interested in like illustrating?
Um, I always drew. I never really considered myself like that great at it. My my wife's father was the cartoonist Ed Koren, and he passed a couple years ago. Um, and that has like almost nothing to do with it, except for the fact that through him I started getting exposed to a lot more like longer form stuff or ways of approaching it and looking at it. Um, and then one summer I ended up working for guy named Howard Cruz, who wrote a book called Stuck Rubber Baby, which is one of it's just this epic story of being a southern queer boy and coming out in the early 60s. And it totally fucking blew my mind because he was just the most lovely man. But it was the first time it had ever really occurred to me, like when you look at some of his panels, there'll be these bar scenes, and you'll have this, like, you can tell that the Shirelles are playing, and it blew my mind because I was like, oh shit, like with a graphic novella or a comic book, you could literally create a short film, but it's just not moving. You can apply the audio, you can apply the movement, and if you're skilled enough or adventurous enough, you can set up the vibe. And through years of making my money trying to get kids to use computers for things aside from sexting, I started just being like, okay, well, this month we're going to learn how to draw with computers. um and a lot of it was just like, Jesus Christ, I can't teach the same class 20 years in a row. So I'd teach podcasting, or I'd do this, or I'd do that. And that was the joys of teaching at private school. You could kind of do whatever you wanted. So I really taught myself how to do a lot of this stuff. And um it just, I was like, hey, look, have iPad, we'll travel. And so back to Jack Jackson. There's something so inspiring about his style because he's completely competent as an artist, but he's not exhausting himself with the world building. It's not like Marvel Comics where he's sitting there with like an isometric grid where you have to like have the perfect geometry of it. He cut himself a lot of slack. And then the idea that he was literally like doing that by hand on those 8x10 things, I was like, well, God, if he can do that, I can get back to trying to draw this story. So
Yeah. And you said your wife's father
he was
was.
a guy named Ed Koren, Koren, New Yorker. The way I really explain him is he's like the post Keith Haring 70s style of New York comics. Like very scraggly. Everyone looks like they have that like 70s I haven't shaved or gotten a decent haircut look in a while. There's a lot of like, we're jogging now. Like, he was very fitness motivated, very and what was so interesting about him is at one point, I don't know, like 15 years ago or something, he was a total New Yorker. He had grown up a little bit outside of the city, went to a high school called Horace Mann, which is in the Bronx, but for a while was a boys' school and was one of those like exceptional schools, right? And then he went to Columbia, and he was drawing, and his cartoon style was like nailed in by the time he was an adolescent. I mean, I saw stuff that he was doing when he was in high school, and certainly by the time he was in college. It's like, that's a Corin. Oh shit. um and it's really wild. And both of his kids, he's all of his kids. He's got 3 kids, and they're all better artists than I would ever attempt to be. But when your parent is super talented in something, you're like, yeah, I don't do that. But Ed was really fascinating. Like my favorite Ed's. I have a bunch of really good Ed stories, but my personal favorite Ed story was when Hole had just released Live Through This, and everyone couldn't get enough of Courtney Love. They were like hating on her like Yoko, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't even living with his daughter yet, but I get this phone call in my apartment in Brooklyn, and he's like, "Oh, hi, it's Ed." And I'm just like, hi. I'm like, what? And he literally has me explain to him. He's like, so explain the baby doll dress and what do they hold? No, like legit. And he's like, and why do they hold the guitars that way? Like he's so got it. Like he's so got, like, Courtney Love's throwing her leg up on an amp and the baby doll dress and the fucking, and I was like, oh shit. I was so tickled by that. And then months later, it's an above the fold arts of leisure fucking drawing, and I'm so sad that we weren't able to find it in his archives, because I was like, oh my god, Sasha, please find that. But most people who make their living representing the world through a visual medium have to be just viciously observant, and Ed was one of the most culturally hungry people I think I'd ever had the pleasure of meeting. I mean, it was like he just give him a museum and he's not going to be out for another 12 hours. And he's just like, this is it,
Yeah.
So yeah, he was pretty cool.
So he's someone that definitely made a big impact on you.
Well, he was my father-in-law, like not as an artist, just like, and also, if you saw my apartment, everything that isn't my rock and roll stuff is like his art, like literally tiles in the wall or like giant scutters and stuff like that. Because he raised my wife in this house, and so they were in this apartment by like 1975 or something. Like if you see that movie The Warriors with the street gangs, they're literally running down our block.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Are you hearing the bird freaking out?
No, not at all.
Okay, good. One of the other things that I always thought was really interesting, and I think it might just be some old family tale, is in that cemetery, the Swearingens aren't all in just one clump.
No.
And I was always, yeah. And that's, and so back to what I was asking about before, I would be so thrilled to get a vector graphic format copy of that, because I think I still have the GPS info for where the gravestones were, and I'd really love to map that out, if only for my brothers. I think they would probably appreciate that. I remember when
I can maybe help you with that, since I'm doing the cemetery tour right now. Like, these kind of maps are very helpful for the cemetery tour.
For sure. And you know what? I mean, we could probably tag team that, because literally you give me the GPS info and I can create the most like visually perfect representation of it. Yeah, I think that would be really sweet, because that's like the sort of stuff I love. I was literally trying to do that for one of the cemeteries here in New York City, and I was like in their office and literally being like, this would be fucking amazing. And then they realized how amazing it would be, and they didn't give me the gig. And I was like, damn it. Well, hey, welcome to New York. But yeah, and so back to the Swearingen thing, I was always wondering, was that economics? Like they didn't plan ahead. So John and Jesse get there, and that's why their graves are there. Like Jesse married Adelia, and I forgot who John married, and I think they're close to each other, but then everyone else is kind of far away.
Yeah, they just didn't have a plot big enough in the first hand. I don't know.
Right. But I have also heard that by the time Samuel was getting in his older years, he was just embarrassing everyone. So, I mean, who knows? Who knows? I have no way of validating any of this. So,
Yeah. What does all this family legacy like mean to you? What is your relationship with it?
hmm, let's see. How do I explain
I
this?
feel like that's what
I
we've been talking about this whole time, but yeah.
Yeah, I yeah, and I might have to get you to paraphrase this so I don't come off sounding like such an asshole. But I have a difficult relationship with with family. Even the concept of it. I've loved my parents tremendously. Didn't like them as people, and it took me a long time to realize that and not feel like I was like an awful person for that. I look at family the way I look at bands that I find really intriguing, but I never want to listen to. Right? So like this whole Rush thing. I'm really intrigued with this new drummer and all this shit. Like I remember that song Tom Sawyer. I had a bass player in high school who loved him. Never fucking want to listen to him again. But I find it all absolutely fascinating. Like how do you form a band? The dynamic, the fact that Geddy and Alex like are still with their high school sweethearts. Like that's weird. How do you do that? I look at my family being a Swearingen in much a similar way. Uh, being the only female in multiple generations, and being queer and living in New York City, being married to a Jew. There's a bunch of things that have kind of put me in this like outlier situation. Um, and I'm not going to say that my family are bigots, but they're not the most tolerant people sometimes. And out of 100% fairness, what I find most intriguing about the majority of that is just the history of it. Like, why do I love John Grisham or Stephen King novels? Because I'm getting this incredible backstory of this really wild thing that helps me understand why that character is reacting the way they do. Is it the town? Is it the story? Lockhart is like that for me. Right. I mean, my mother is from a town in Minnesota that Judy Garland lived in, and her father was driven out because he was like the lone queer and ran a movie theater, and she was born Frances Gum. Like that's fucking intriguing to me too. But my mother's maiden name is Olson, so you're shit out of luck there, right? But so like Swearingen, it's like from the time that I have been able to write my name or have been in the position of introducing myself for any bureaucratic situation or social, the reaction to both my names and then the combination of them has always been like, what's behind that? There's plenty of stories for Jessamine. There's plenty of stories for Swearingen. So I've gotten to be the raconteur, right? Because it's just easier than having someone, particularly in New York City, be like, "What the fuck is that?" It's like, "I'm sorry, it's So that's a part of it, but it's also I spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out why was I born here and now, like 1971, to like be raised with all the Coca-Cola commercials and the that weird little last gasp of it's okay to like really think only white people are good, and then now being solidly in middle aged and quite frankly being a little alarmed at the America that I'm going to find myself aging into. And Texas is a fantastic microcosm of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've I've been in a lot of states. I've lived in New York for the majority of my life, but Texas is that wart in America that is is endlessly fascinating. Like, they don't make fucking multi-generational shows about Iowa. You're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Caitlin Clark, but it's true. And Texas, is it because it's on the border of Mexico? Is it because it's stolen land? Is it because it represents the ongoing hostility of European heritage versus indigenous land rights? It's like there's just so many things that Texas represents to historians, to people in the media. I think even, I've spent a huge amount of intellectual and creative energy in the realms of rock and roll. I mean, that was my first love. And when you really look at where this music comes from, and like, Hank Williams, right? Like, his guitar teacher was a black guy who was like, yeah, you know what? All that shit you're doing, it's just white boy blues, right? So it's all just the same shit, right? And if it there's certain people who are able to become those nodes and to represent and explain things in ways that are almost inappropriate for where they're from. Like Bruce Springsteen, right? He's from New Jersey. He reads Southern, he reads Rust Belt, he reads Ohio, he reads Texas, but he's from New Jersey. Like, what's up with that? But most importantly, he reads America. And Texas, to me, has that same sort of thing where it's like, you see the boots, you see the jeans, you see the hat. Yeah, it might be a little Mexico, but it's America. It's like the truck, and like it or lump it, and there's so many things about it that are disturbing and evidence of a culture that takes more than it gives. I say that, but there's more warmth in Texas than there is in Minnesota, right? I mean, the generosity spirit that I have found, even in the way that people try to heap food on you when I'm down there,
Yeah.
is just wild, right? And I've never gotten that. Maybe New Orleans, maybe Louisiana, but there is just something so warm, generous, and once they get over like the stranger danger, there's a sense of um collective joy in Texas that the only thing I can compare it to is like, New York, the way I walked about 2 miles today after running an errand, and I lost count of how many people are wearing Knicks shirts.
Yeah.
Right. And we're like 4 days away from that final game. I mean, it's like people want a sense of collective something. And whenever I am in Texas, I am always very aware that I am in Texas. And there are not many places that I can say that. Like New York, I know I'm in New York. Texas, I know I'm in Texas. But there's a lot of other places. It's like, yeah, it could be almost any other place, right?
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen. I mean, between money, politics, and just my general animosity towards the world. But if you end up doing something that's really cool with this, I might figure out some way to come down and like sneak my ass into an Airbnb and drag Sasha down or something. My cousin Forrest would just be really thrilled to be able to participate in this, and my brothers might. I just don't know if it gets gnarly. I don't know how much I want to involve them, because they're gonna pull that like, you're my little sister, why didn't you ask my permission? And they would pull that shit, and then there would be violence.
Yeah.
It's my milkshake. It's my milkshake.
Well, if you end up coming down here, that'd be awesome. My angle is just like Lockhart is just we're at another moment of Lockhart changing so fast.
Yeah.
We're growing rapidly, and this is just like what we're doing right here is just like oral history. It's just conversation. And
Yeah.
I hope that will be like a gift to somebody.
No, I think it's really lovely. I mean, I was only able to watch like the first 5 minutes of that clock film, and it was really, really, I mean, I was like, oh yeah, I know where I am, man. I really know where I am from the way that that kid was dressed, and, um, yeah, and I think the other thing too that I definitely notice is that the more technology advances, the more the people who are in front of us are curious about what happened before.
Yeah.
And with Lockhart evolving and changing so quickly, I think the other thing, I think this is the thing more of what I'm trying to articulate is that because my generation is smaller than yours, and because my parents' generation is, you know, quickly dying, um, those stories are gone. But not only that, but like so is the culture and the furniture. Like when I spend time on Reddit, the stuff I like the most is the stuff that's catering towards like my brother and my mother's generation. And I look at the furniture and shit, and I'm like, oh, I so remember that. Or God, what was that show, Mara of Easttown? I was watching it, and I was like so bugged out by it. My wife was like, why is this freaking you out so much? And I was like, because this living room is my aunt's living room, and they captured lower middle class America in a way that no one in New York City will ever see, and most people watching television won't see, because we're trying to present this like bling bullshit. And that's not the I would assume that's not the way most people live. Like, I live in New York City, and I cater to the people who want to be 1%, but man, they ain't all that. Their kids are
Yeah.
still fucked up and depressed and weird. And we all got to figure out how to feed ourselves. And so all this oral history stuff I think is so incredibly valuable, because and here's the thing that I think is really interesting for the people who do this sort of work that you and I do on different levels. Everything's getting so digital, so the analog archives aren't going to be as easy to plunder. The hardcore data, the marriage records, the birth records, yeah, that's always going to be there. But I don't remember the last time I sat down, hand wrote a fucking letter, and put it in the mailbox with all my stupid little illustrations all over the envelope, or like made a mixtape. I used to be the queen of that shit. Right.
Yeah.
So now it's all digital. And all of that stuff that I used to do when I was, even up until my 30s, and like my epic letters and stuff. Well, how are you going to write a biography about someone? Are you going to like what, contact their IP and be like, can I scan every fucking email they wrote? That's what blows my mind. So I think like the work that you're doing with being like, oh, you're a legit grandchild, great A.L. Brock and Samuel Blackstone, I think, are my great great grandfathers. I'd have to,
Okay.
double
Yeah.
check on that. But what you're doing is literally capturing history from people who heard it from their kin,
Yeah.
right? And that's dramatically important, because um all of the stories that I heard from people who heard it from their ancestors.
Right.
And that's, it might be diluted a bit, like a game of operator, telephone, whatever, but it still has that level of intimacy and legitimacy that trolling through ancestry.com and looking at someone's marriage records. And also, more to the point, I was talking to one of my clients about this. People don't get married the way that they used to. So that necessity of the family bonds, for good or bad, people are getting divorced. They don't marry as much as they used to. They're having children out of wedlock. So this way of being able to trace down the facts and get that real narrative, I would assume, would be harder and harder. What are you gonna do? Go through someone's fucking YouTube feed?
I'm like, is this oral history that goes in a can podcast be oral history? I guess. Why not? I'm like, but
I think
yeah.
so. Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, because I think you're really doing some like really fantastic stuff. There's some really neat stuff I found about Lockhart. People reading like town meetings and stuff like that. Preserving accents is so wild too. We don't phrase things the way that we used to. There was one of those. I'll find it. probably easier on Amazon, but every small town has someone who thinks they're an expert on it, and then they talk to those small publishers and they put together those Lockhart memory books or whatever it is. I have one of those, and I was like a little like surprised that I could barely find any Swearingen or Brock stuff. And so also what that told me was, oh, a different family did this, right? So all of this stuff is so personal. It really depends on like what is your angle, where is it coming from, what is the stuff that's important to you. And I think the fact that you are able to find people who actually are related to these people, rather than maybe moving into Lockhart and going, oh wow, that's really cute, I want to start an artisanal pickle store or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm an introvert, but I love this.
I fully understand that. The last story, oh my god, my cat's losing her mind. Last story I'll leave you with is when my father was in he died in the old age home that his grandmother went to, and it was where Ann Richards lived when she passed.
Oh wow.
Sorry, my cat is moving this table. Okay, now we're done. And I was so intrigued with the people that he lived with. It was like, oh wow, my kid went to college and I like all his friends. How great. And so I would go and I'd have lunch every day with all the, old folk. And at one point, they all started talking about what would happen when it was laundry day and what their mothers would do. Now, mind you, all of these people were probably born in the 30s. My father was born in 1934. And he told me that they would take laundry to the colored woman down the hill who had a giant pot in her front yard with boiling water and probably lye, and she would throw all the laundry in it with like a giant fucking stick, and that was her gig. And all the women around the table were like, yep, my mama did that too. It's like there was that woman who lived down the hill. And I was so blown away by that because, again, like I've lived in New York City most of my life, like things had already been so commercialized and much more modernized and industrial and stuff like that. But just the idea that like you would take your laundry down the hill to this woman who put it in a giant vat. Whoa.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to what you were saying in the beginning. Like, I don't want to say how far New York was along when Texas was just getting started, but I don't know, just that juxtaposition.
Well, yeah, but for different things, it's like the thing that really strikes me at Smitty's when I go there is, and I'm sure I'm wrong about this, but like, well, I don't know if I am or not, but those knives that are chained to the tables. I remember once asking either my father or my brother or someone about it, and they just kind of looked at me and they're like, well, yeah, it's probably left over from Jim Crow because they just didn't want people interacting with each other. And being the only person who had been raised in the Yankee Northeast, I really was just like, oh, that's a little mind-blowing. And they were kind of like, yeah, that's okay. Like we have Confederate dollar bills too. Isn't that cool? And I was like, ha, 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 okay. But Smitty's after church is much more diverse than anything I see in New York City. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you might not be sitting next to them, but there's a Mexican family, there's a white family, there's a black family. I sure as shit don't see that most of the places I go to in my New York. And it's not just economic comfort. It's just like we're tribal, we're segregated. And in Texas again, like why Texas? Man, cheek by jowl, man. It's like, when you watch that Ken Burns thing on jazz and there's just like there's a necessity of harmony, right? And so if you're gonna live on that land and live with those people and live with all those ghosts, you better get comfortable with it, right? And Texas is pretty ghosty too, I think, because it's like I definitely feel like when I'm there, it isn't just my ancestors, but I'm definitely feeling like the heaviness of like this was a land that has been under such intense conflict, Yeah, you feel it in New York, but what I feel in New York is like money, man. People just want money. They'll tear that shit down in a second if they can make money on it. Texas, what I feel is this intense physical grit. People were fucking dragging animals around and shooting each other and just like digging into that soil. And New York, you can't even see the ground anymore. Texas, you can still see the ground in the sky. You know where you are.
We've gone an hour and a half or so. Like,
Oh Jesus!
well, I don't even know. But you didn't skip a beat. I lost my steam because I'm a dummy and didn't eat food. But I thought this was great. Thank you so much. Like,
Absolutely,
we're gonna keep in touch. Like, obviously.
absolutely. I feel like I've been a new friend. I really dig it. All right, have an excellent day, and I'm finally gonna watch Widow's Bay because
This podcast is produced by Graybeard Films and made possible through the support of Go Back to California. If you have feedback or a suggestion of someone you think should be interviewed, you can reach me at brandon@graybeardfilms.com. For updates, bonus clips, and more stories from Caldwell County, follow Lockhart Bits and Pieces on Instagram. Until next time.